My boss said this was against the rules, but that's exactly what made it irresistible. The office hummed with its usual rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones buzzing, the quiet shuffle of papers, but for him, none of it seemed particularly ordinary. There was one presence that always managed to draw his attention, a quiet gravitational pull that made the fluorescent light seem softer whenever she walked into the room. His boss, a woman in her early 40s, carried herself with an elegance that wasn't showy but deeply assured. She didn't just move through the office, she seemed to inhabit it, every gesture deliberate, every glance measured yet unintentionally magnetic. He often found himself observing her from across the room without realizing it. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the subtle tilt of her head when she considered a problem, even the soft hum of her voice while dictating instructions, each detail felt like a secret meant only for him to notice. There was a warmth in her presence that had nothing to do with physical proximity, it was the kind of comfort and quiet confidence that made the mundane feel alive. It was during a routine file handoff that the subtle tension first made itself known. As he extended a stack of papers toward her, their fingers brushed ever so slightly. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it left a lingering warmth that ran up his arm. He could feel the faint pulse of energy in that fleeting moment, the way the ordinary act of passing documents suddenly carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. He tried to dismiss it, reminding himself that admiration didn't have to go further than noticing how graceful she was in her daily motions. Yet, there was something almost hypnotic in the way she laughed at a joke no one else seemed to catch, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners in a smile that felt both private and knowing. It was impossible not to feel drawn in, to be aware of the quiet rhythm of her presence and the understated magnetism that seemed to ripple through every corner of the office. Even in brief encounters, the accidental brush at the coffee machine, the shared glance across a crowded meeting room, he felt the subtle charge of unspoken curiosity. It wasn't inappropriate or loud, it was quiet, persistent, and entirely consuming in its own understated way. By the end of the day, he realized that he had been thinking of her more than the work itself. There was a small, almost guilty thrill in noticing her, in feeling that quiet tension between admiration and something more delicate, something that perhaps neither of them fully understood yet. This was the beginning, a slow, careful stirring of curiosity that would soon become impossible to ignore. The office had a rhythm, a predictability that usually offered comfort, but lately, every glance in her direction felt like stepping onto the edge of something forbidden. He had always known the boundaries, she was his boss, a professional anchor in the workplace, but lately, those rules seemed to hum in his mind, demanding attention he couldn't quite control. Every interaction carried an electric undercurrent, a silent acknowledgement of the tension neither of them dared name aloud. It was subtle at first. A brush of her hand as she reached across the desk to point out a spreadsheet, the accidental touch sending a shiver up his spine, and yet it was all fleeting, all ostensibly innocent. But with each passing day, those fleeting moments began to accumulate, layering curiosity with an almost magnetic anticipation. He found himself noticing the warmth of her presence more acutely, the soft scent of her perfume mingling with the faint aroma of coffee, the quiet hum of her voice when she leaned slightly closer to explain a task. She had a way of teasing without words, too, and he was increasingly aware of the effect it had on him. During a routine discussion about office policy, she smiled that subtle, knowing smile and said something like, "Some things are against the rules, but that's what makes them fun." The words were casual, meant perhaps to amuse herself more than him, yet the effect on him was immediate. His heart sped slightly, a private acknowledgement that the line they were not supposed to cross suddenly felt less rigid, more thrilling. Every glance became loaded with possibility. The briefest eye contact in a crowded meeting sent a ripple of awareness through him, a quiet reminder that attraction could exist even within professional confines. He began to notice the way she lingered near him slightly longer than necessary, how her gestures carried a warmth that didn't go unnoticed, and how her presence alone could make the ordinary office feel charged. Internally, he wrestled with hesitation and excitement. He reminded himself that admiration had boundaries, that the workplace required restraint, yet the thrill of the unspoken, the silent acknowledgement of desire, was impossible to ignore. Each touch, each look, each small, playful comment was like a quiet test of limits, a private game they were both aware of, yet neither dared to name. By the end of the day, he realized that his awareness of her had become a constant, a quiet pulse beneath the surface of every task. He was caught in a delicate balance, respecting the rules while feeling a pull towards something undeniably magnetic. The tension was intoxicating, a slow, simmering anticipation that promised to grow, and he knew with a mixture of fear and longing that the next encounter would bring them closer, perhaps too close, to crossing the line that had suddenly become so tantalizingly blurry. The office felt quieter than usual that afternoon, the soft hum of the air conditioning blending with the occasional shuffle of papers and distant phone rings. He found himself drawn again to her presence, though this time, the pull was different, less about forbidden curiosity, more about a shared understanding that existed between them. They were colleagues, yes, but in the few moments they had together, there was an intimacy of attention, a subtle recognition of each other's thoughts and rhythms. It began with the small, almost imperceptible gestures that somehow carried more weight than words. While reviewing a set of reports, her hand brushed lightly against his arm as she pointed out a detail. The touch was brief, delicate, and professional on the surface, but underneath it carried an unspoken reassurance, a quiet acknowledgement that she trusted him in a way that no one else in the office did. He felt a warmth bloom where her fingers grazed his skin, a soft pulse of connection that made him acutely aware of her proximity. Shared laughter became another bridge between them. Something as simple as a comment on a particularly confusing spreadsheet would send them both into quiet chuckles, her laugh warm and melodic, lingering in the small meeting room long after the joke had passed. He noticed the subtle details, the tilt of her head when she smiled, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the gentle warmth in her voice when she spoke directly to him. These small, seemingly ordinary moments began to carry emotional weight, weaving a tapestry of trust and closeness that felt private, almost sacred. Even the mundane tasks of the office transformed into shared experiences. Moving files across the room, reviewing emails together, or waiting for the printer, it was in these small instances that proximity and timing seemed to conspire, allowing them to lean closer than necessary, to exchange fleeting glances, to savor moments that felt stolen from the day's routine. The subtle tension between them was palpable, a quiet electricity that neither could ignore, yet both navigated with careful, almost instinctive restraint. He found himself lingering in these moments, savoring the tactile and emotional details, the warmth of her shoulder near his, the quiet steadiness of her breath when she leaned in to read a document, the brief, accidental touch of hands that seemed to echo with significance. Each encounter left him with a quiet, aching awareness that what he felt went beyond admiration. It was an emotional tether, a slow, unfolding connection that promised more than either of them dared acknowledge. By the end of the day, he realized that these shared moments were shaping his world, making the ordinary extraordinary. He was no longer just aware of her presence, he was attuned to the subtle rhythms that defined it, aware of the delicate tension and quiet intimacy growing between them, and anticipating, with a mixture of excitement and fear, the moments yet to come. The office had taken on a different rhythm lately, one tinged with anticipation, unspoken awareness, and a quiet thrill that neither of them fully acknowledged. Their interactions, once strictly professional, now carried a subtle playfulness, a careful testing of boundaries that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. Each gesture, each glance, seemed laden with possibility, and he found himself anticipating these small encounters with a mixture of excitement and restraint. It began innocuously enough, a joke about a spreadsheet, a teasing comment about deadlines. She smiled that knowing smile, the one that made him feel as though he were the only person in the room, and said something along the lines of, "Rules are meant to be bent, aren't they?" Her tone was light, teasing, yet it carried a charge that made his pulse quicken. The remark was playful on the surface, but the subtext was unmistakable, and he realized with a mixture of thrill and hesitation that they were quietly testing the waters, exploring limits that weren't supposed to exist. Every small touch became a subtle challenge. As they leaned over documents together, her hand brushed his arm with deliberate casualness, a touch that lingered just long enough to spark a quiet awareness between them. In the break room, their elbows accidentally collided over the coffee machine, and she looked up at him with an expression that held a mixture of mischief and curiosity. He could feel the warmth radiating from her presence, the way her gaze seemed to linger, almost daring him to respond in kind. The tension wasn't loud or overt, it was slow, simmering, and almost teasingly deliberate. He found himself consciously aware of the electricity in the air, noticing the smallest details, the tilt of her head as she listened, the subtle softness in her voice when she addressed him, the gentle way her fingers grazed his hand while pointing at a document. Each of these moments was a quiet invitation, a chance for them to explore the unspoken connection that had been quietly building for weeks. Internally, he wrestled with the thrill of the forbidden and the caution of propriety. The rules were clear, and yet every interaction, every teasing comment, every fleeting touch made the line blur just a little. The playful challenge wasn't about crossing boundaries outright, it was about feeling them, testing them, and savoring the delicate tension that came with knowing what they couldn't say but could feel. By the end of the day, he realized that their interactions had evolved into a delicate dance of desire and restraint. The thrill of the playful challenge left him restless, longing for the next encounter, and acutely aware that their connection was growing deeper, more complicated, and far more intoxicating than he had ever expected. The office was quieter than usual that evening, the soft hum of the air conditioning blending with the distant clatter of keyboards and the occasional ringing phone. Most people had already left, leaving the two of them alone in the stillness of the workspace. The atmosphere felt charged, not with overt drama, but with the subtle weight of unspoken thoughts, shared glances, and the faint possibility of crossing an invisible line that had been drawn between them. They were working late on a project, hunched over documents side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Each accidental touch sent a small ripple of awareness through him, a reminder that what he felt for her was no longer just curiosity or admiration. He noticed the warmth of her proximity, the quiet steadiness in her breathing, the softness in her voice when she spoke about mundane office tasks. Every detail seemed amplified in the hush of the nearly empty office, each gesture carrying meaning far beyond its surface. Then she spoke, not about work, but about herself. Her voice lowered, carrying a note of vulnerability that he had rarely heard before. She shared a personal story, something from her past that revealed a side of her she usually kept carefully guarded. As he listened, he became aware of the delicate intimacy forming between them. This wasn't flirtation or teasing anymore, it was a quiet opening of the soul, a glimpse into the person behind the professional facade. He responded with sincere attentiveness, leaning slightly closer, not just to hear her, but to offer silent support. The simple act of proximity, the faint brushing of their arms, the shared space over the desk, felt laden with meaning. He realized that trust was being built in these small, quiet ways, that the connection they shared extended far beyond mere attraction. It was a tender understanding, a delicate acknowledgement of the emotions they were both feeling but had yet to name aloud. Neither of them spoke of the tension that hung between them, yet it was there in every glance, every subtle smile, every lingering moment of eye contact. He could sense her awareness of his presence, just as he was increasingly conscious of hers. There was a magnetic pull, restrained yet undeniable, a shared recognition of feelings too complex to express in words. By the time they finally prepared to leave, a quiet understanding had settled between them. The unspoken confession was clear, both were aware of the deepening connection, both felt the simmering desire tempered by hesitation. Their hands brushed briefly as they collected their things, and in that simple contact, there was a promise, a silent acknowledgement that what was developing between them was far more than professional. It was a delicate, thrilling beginning, a confession in silence that neither dared speak but both fully understood. The office felt different that evening, quieter, warmer somehow, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of anticipation. The usual clatter of keyboards and hum of fluorescent lights faded into the background, replaced by the subtle rhythm of their own presence in the room. It wasn't just proximity that made him aware of her now, it was the deliberate, quiet intimacy that had been building over weeks, the shared glances, the fleeting touches, the silent understanding that both thrilled and terrified him. They were finishing up a late project, leaning over the same documents, and their shoulders brushed repeatedly. Each contact was more than accidental now, it carried intention, a soft punctuation to the unspoken words that lingered between them. When she reached for a stack of papers, their hands touched again, longer this time, and he could feel a warmth radiating through the subtle pressure. Neither spoke, yet the air between them was charged with awareness. She laughed softly at a minor mistake in the spreadsheet, and as he smiled back, he noticed the gentle way her eyes held his, unflinching, as if daring him to acknowledge what they were both feeling. The playful tension had shifted into something deeper, more intimate, an unspoken agreement that they were exploring the line between professional restraint and personal desire. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. Then came a moment of quiet vulnerability. She leaned closer to steady a box of files he had been struggling with, and their hands touched fully, fingers brushing in a subtle, deliberate gesture. His pulse quickened at the warmth and the intimacy of the contact. He could feel her awareness of him in that instant, the shared acknowledgement that the rules they had been observing were bending under the weight of something neither wanted to name yet. Her voice, low and calm, carried a softness that made him pause. "I know this isn't exactly allowed," she murmured, "but I can't pretend I don't notice you." It was a confession wrapped in restraint, a careful admission that mirrored his own unspoken feelings. He swallowed hard, aware of the electricity in the room, the delicate dance between temptation and propriety that neither could fully resist. They stayed close, lingering near each other as they finished tidying the office. Every movement, every gesture, felt charged with unspoken meaning, the brush of a hand on a shoulder, the warmth of a lingering gaze, the quiet laughter that followed minor teasing. For the first time, the rules weren't just boundaries, they were a backdrop for intimacy, a canvas on which they were quietly sketching the beginnings of something more. By the time they left the office, both were acutely aware of the shift. The connection had grown undeniable, a magnetic pull that neither could ignore. They had broken the rules in subtle, profound ways, not with recklessness, but with deliberate tenderness, and in doing so, they had crossed into a space where desire, trust, and emotional intimacy could finally coexist. The evening air outside the office was crisp, carrying a faint scent of autumn leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Inside, however, the warmth between them lingered long after the fluorescent lights were switched off. The quiet moments they had shared, the lingering touches, the soft smiles, the unspoken confessions, had shifted the rhythm of their relationship. The office was no longer just a place of work, it had become a stage for intimacy, connection, and quiet revelation. They walked together to the elevator, side by side, the subtle brush of arms sending a shiver of awareness through him. It was no longer just curiosity or playful tension, there was something deeper now, something that needed neither words nor explanation to be understood. Their glances met in the reflective glass of the elevator doors, and he noticed the softness in her eyes, the quiet acknowledgement that they had crossed a threshold, gently and deliberately, into a space where desire and trust could coexist. As they stepped out onto the street, she suggested grabbing a coffee at a nearby cafe. The invitation was casual, yet it carried the weight of shared understanding. They walked together, shoulders brushing occasionally, each touch light but meaningful, each glance carrying the intimacy that had been quietly building over weeks. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and he felt a rush of warmth, a comforting blend of excitement and contentment. Seated across from each other with warm mugs in hand, the conversation flowed easily. They spoke of trivial things, the weather, their favorite books, small memories, but every word carried a subtle undercurrent of connection. When she reached across the table to brush a stray strand of hair from his face, the gesture felt both intimate and natural, a quiet affirmation of the bond they had nurtured. He noticed the gentle steadiness of her hand, the warmth of her touch, and the sincerity in her gaze. The night drew on, and as they prepared to leave, she offered a small, deliberate gesture, a brief hug, her cheek resting lightly against his chest. He felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat, a rhythm that resonated with his own. It was a simple act, yet it carried the weight of weeks of subtle glances, playful teasing, and unspoken confessions. The warmth lingered long after they parted, leaving him with a profound sense of connection and anticipation for what lay ahead. In that moment, the rules that had once defined the boundaries of their relationship felt less rigid. They had explored the space between restraint and desire, and emerged with a shared understanding, the beginning of something slow, deliberate, and deeply meaningful. The night ended not with dramatic declarations, but with a quiet promise, an acknowledgement that what had grown between them was real, tender, and worth savoring. And as he walked away, he knew that this was only the beginning of a journey neither of them had fully expected, yet both were ready to embrace together. If you felt the tension, the slow burn, and the quiet magic between them, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the full story, and check the link in the description for more moments that make your heart race.